Welcome to Money Matters, the show where we explore financial issues shaping our lives, economies, and futures. Today, this is the first show in our new time slot, and it's Black History Month here in America, where I reside. So, we're going to dive into the topic that has gained significant momentum across the Caribbean, and that is of reparations and financial justice. Especially for us, the descendants of enslaved Africans. Now, for centuries, the economies of the Caribbean were built on the backs of enslaved Africans. Our ancestors were stolen from their homes, forced into unpaid labor, and denied the right to build wealth. Now, meanwhile, European nations amassed fortunes, financing industrial revolutions, expanding empires, and growing their economies, while us here in the Caribbean was left in economic limbo. Now, even after slavery ended, reparations were never given to the people who suffered the most. Instead, colonial powers compensated former slave owners for their loss of property. For example, the British government paid out £20 million, which is the equivalent to $17 billion today, to enslavers after the abolition in 1834. Now, this burden was placed on British taxpayers, yes, including the descendants of the enslaved. Um, and that loan was only finally repaid back in 2015. Now, today, the call for reparations is growing louder. You have the CARICOM Reparations Committee, which was established back in 2013. They're leading the fight and demanding reparatory justice from Britain, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. They've issued a 10-point plan, which was developed and which outlines steps from formal apologies to reparation programs to debt cancellations, investments in healthcare and education. Now, there has been some progress made. In 2023, the Netherlands officially apologized for its role in the slave trade and pledged 200 million euros to fund reparatory initiatives. In Jamaica, there's this growing pressure on Britain to engage in direct reparations talks, and similarly in Barbados as well. Now, institutions like the UE, University of the West Indies, they've been vocal and demanding global banks and corporations acknowledge and atone for their historic profits from slavery. Yet there is resistance. Now, critics argue that reparations are impractical, asking who would pay, who would receive it. Now, some believe the Caribbean should focus on economic self reliance rather than seeking financial compensation. However, supporters argue that without reparations, the structural disadvantages created by slavery will persist indefinitely. So, what does the real financial justice look like for the Caribbean? Should reparations take the form of cash payments, investment in infrastructure, or economic policies? How can Caribbean nations like St. Kitts and Nevis and Antigua and Barbuda, where our guest is from, ensure these efforts lead to long-term prosperity? Now, today I'm joined by Angelica O'Donoghue. Angelica sits on the Antigua and Barbuda Repertory Commission. I know she recently attended a regional meeting where these important topics were discussed, the topics of financial justice and what that means for 2025 and beyond. Angelica, thank you for joining us. Let's dive into today's topic.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Martin and Terrance, for having me today. And, good afternoon to St. Kitts and Nevis, the wider Caribbean region. And, in the US, they call it Black History Month. And here in the Caribbean, well, specifically Antigua, we have sort of recoined it to Black Heritage Month.
I like that.
We hold the premise that Black history did not start or end with enslavement. So we
I
celebrate
love that.
ourselves, our
Mhm.
heritage, and who we are based on the color of our skin. Now, I know your show is a financial show. It's Money Matters, and money will always matter. So I want to begin with a quote from one of my favorite books by Jamaica Kincaid.
Okay.
And it goes, do you ever try to understand why people like me cannot get over the past, cannot forgive, and cannot forget? There is Barclays Bank. The Barclays brothers are dead. The human beings they traded, the human beings who to them were only commodities, are dead. But the Barclays Bank stands. So, do
Mhm.
you see the queer thing about people like me? Sometimes we hold on to our retribution. And I'm using that quote to open up because here we see Jamaica condemning the early capitalist system, that traded human beings as commodity, turning their bodies into an embodiment of just commodities, which were no different than sugar or rum. And the
Mm-hmm.
Barclays brothers illustrate how historical acts of exploitation, rape of a human being, are never really over. Despite, and we will get into that today in the show too, because we have people, that look like us who would tell us, get over it. It's
Yep.
400 years, get over it.
Pull up
This
yourself by
year,
the bootstraps. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, despite our desire to pretend otherwise, the Barclays banks and institutions like them are clear evidence of how they had used human beings to exploit to their benefit. I mean, after making their fortune in the slave trade, the Barclays went into banking, and mind you, this is not just the name of a bank. These were
Mm-hmm.
actual people, the Barclays
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
brothers.
Yes.
Yeah, and for those who may not know, yes, that bank that we grew up knowing about, that bank that we all had our savings, our parents had their savings in. Mind you, the same bank that when they pulled out of the region, we all cried foul. Oh my goodness. Another
Mm-hmm.
international bank has left. But
Right.
getting back to the point, the Barclays went into banking and the financial institution they set up continues to operate worldwide.
It's a global
Ironically,
mecca.
it's a global bank. And,
Yeah.
ironically, Barclays Bank was a major bank in Antigua, issuing loans, managing our
Mm-hmm.
funds, the
Mm-hmm.
funds of the descendants of the very slaved, the very enslaved people who were the source of their own fortune.
It's really interesting, Angelica, when you think about the history, because you bring up banking and you kind of jump into it a lot faster than I wanted to. I wanted to introduce you to the people, but we can do that at the end because this is important. The Rothschilds, which are seen
Ah.
as the founders or the initial investors of most of the world's central banks. I mean, we can't ignore that too because they started out by funding mercantile ships. So what did
Mhm.
mercantile ships carry? People, right?
People.
So even
Mhm.
even the central banking system around the world is at the
Mhm.
center of this conversation about slavery. And I think
Mhm.
that in and of itself leads to a very important topic, which is
Mhm.
the wealth gap that is pervasive in the Caribbean. Now, you see in the US, right? And we've talked, you know my perspective on this. You have the rich, which is like the top 1%, and then you have everybody else, right? It used to
Mhm.
be a middle class, and the middle class has shrunk, but they're trying to revive it. But back home, it's just the have-nots, right, versus those that don't. And the reality is
Mhm.
that we see some legacy that stem from family, the legacy of slavery that still exists. We still
Mhm.
see the local colonial names within our economic framework and our economies. So my
Mhm.
first question that I want us to talk about, how does this legacy of slavery, in your opinion, and from the work that you guys have done on your commission and regionally, how does the legacy of slavery and colonialism continue to impact our conditions today as a region? Think about Antigua, think about St. Kitts, etc.
You kind of answer that question yourself because at the end of the day, you can't take from nothing, right? You can't gain from nothing. You can't pass down nothing to nothing. And that is what enslavement did. There was no way for us to accrue generational wealth because there was nothing there to give back. Mind you, when when slavery, quote unquote, was ended in most places in 1838, in Antigua 1834, you were said, okay, hey, you're free. But free with what? They left most of us with barren land. There was no system put in place in terms of formal education. We were already taken away from our languages, from our gods, from our own sense of being. And there was nothing there to leave behind to accrue and to accumulate generational wealth. And we see this is indicative throughout the Caribbean and I'm sure in America as well. And
Mm-hmm.
then you're now asked some 200 years later, because this year would make 192 years, is that correct? But 192 years since the end of enslavement. And you're asking us to catch up. You're asking the region to, pull up your bootstraps and keep it
Mm-hmm.
moving, keep it
Mm-hmm.
pushing. But keep it moving from what? We have a situation here, like for example in Antigua, where our infrastructure is deteriorated because you have a piping system that's been there since colonial times. And
Mm.
no one ever said, hey, I know I left you this crap. Let me help you to restore it. Because that's exactly what they did. They left us barren on barren land. And then you're asking us to make something out of nothing. And we're placing this vicious cycle because reparatory justice no plays into, and I'm sure you've heard the point, into climate
Mm-hmm.
justice. Because here we have a region trying to claw our way out of debt that we indebted from our
Mm-hmm.
former colonizers. And we are placed in a region that we are systematically, year after year, afflicted by this vicious cycle of climate change. And we got to start back from scratch again. And a lot of the times, let us be fair that we're not even the biggest contributors of climate change, but at the end of the day, we suffer the most. So it's
We
just
need
this
more.
vicious cycle.
It is a cycle because as you so eloquently described, we're getting hit from multiple spaces, and I have to respect leaders like your own Honorable Gaston Brown and Motley, Mia Motley. Is that right? Did I say Mia Motley? No, what's the one in is Motley her name in
Yes,
Barbados? Is
yes,
that her name?
yes,
All
yes,
right,
yes,
cool, okay.
yes, yeah.
And the work that she's doing and actually speaking out and standing in these rooms of giants like the G8, right? I mean, when you're talking about these topics and being having the cojones in order to speak up really on our behalf. So because that's really important, right? Because you're right. It's almost like, yeah, we continuously paying. And you look at like Haiti, right? Where Haiti just what in recent times paid off their loans to France, and we see the
Mhm,
economic state Haiti is still in to this day, which is directly linked to colonialism. And I remember walking through the Louvre, right? And going to
mhm,
Napoleon's quarters, and there's so much gold. And I remember being so infuriated as I stood in that museum because I knew this was stolen wealth. It
yeah.
was stolen wealth on display. I mean, the Louvre is literally a building of stolen wealth. Same
Mhm,
thing with the museum in here in New York. Same thing there in London. It's stolen wealth. Um,
mhm,
what progress, in your opinion, has your commission made? So tell us about the Antiguan experience if you can, and then we could extend it to the Caribbean. And I know we have a similar commission in St. Kitts, and I will do a follow up with them. But I'm just curious because Antigua has been interesting. And I
mhm.
referenced your prime minister just a while ago, and I know he's a boss. They call him world boss, and I know he's extended that into this push for reparatory justice. So talk about
Mhm.
some of the strides in Antigua, and then we'll talk about some of the strides that we've made on a regional scale.
Just to set context, the Antigua and Barbuda Reparation Support Commission is basically a member of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, the CRC. And the
Okay.
CRC reports directly to the Prime Minister Subcommittee for CARICOM on Reparations. And that subcommittee is chaired by Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley. So,
Okay.
in each CARICOM member state, you're tasked in formulating a committee or a commission, that would work on several things. And the most important thing is to educate and to edify. We are responsible or tasked with the idea of letting our brothers and sisters know that reparations is a real thing,
Mm-hmm.
that crime to humanity, because that's exactly what it is. It's a real thing, and we are advocated for that form of reparatory justice in a number of ways. But our main task is to educate. We participate in a number of events and initiatives. We're in the schools. We are pushing that conversation for it to happen on a national scale. You know, Back in the 60s, the whole talk of reparations became heightened with the whole Pan Africanist movement and what was happening in the
Mm-hmm.
US as well. But
Mm-hmm.
this has been a movement that has happened even before then. It is acknowledging that what happened to us is a crime to humanity. What happened to the Jews was a crime to humanity. And they saw some form of reparations or reparatory justice that they're still benefiting today. And what happened to the descendants of Black people was so systematic. It wasn't just a one-off thing. Yeah? Slavery didn't
Mm-hmm.
just happen in one year, ended the next. Slavery didn't just happen in just concentration camps. It was a systematic dehumanizing of a human being. You're
Mm-hmm.
taking a person and you're removing their personhood. You're creating empty vessels. One, you take their tongue. And I want us,
Mm-hmm.
across the region, St. Kitts, here in Antigua, I want us to recognize that they stole our tongue, our language.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take a man's tongue, you take who he is. You stole our gods. You emptied us from what we believed in, yeah? And we
Mm-hmm.
can get into the whole different talks about the whole different type of religions, but at the end of the day, each each set of persons across the world had their own system of belief.
You
Our
listen,
ancestors had their own system of belief, and they stole that.
they stole that because they knew. I think I can't remember who said it. I think but it's well documented when they were talking about how to maintain power in Africa. They said, well, if you take their name, if you take their religion, then you take the man because you enter
Mm-hmm.
in chaos. You
Mm-hmm.
embed chaos into a culture, into a being, and honestly,
Well crafted
we're still
chaos.
seeing it. We're still seeing it today. Now, interestingly, Angelica, you mentioned that the Jews get reparations, but they've been getting reparations since the 1950s. And they get reparations since from Germany since the 1950s, and they get it in the form of pensions. So even
Mm-hmm.
survivors of Holocaust victims that are alive today are still
Mm-hmm.
benefiting from reparations, right?
Are
And
still
not
benefiting.
yeah, and I mean financial contribution specifically earmarked for them as well. And then on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, I want to say there was some form of reparations between Israel and Germany as well, even on a
Mm-hmm.
country scale, right? So, but
Mm-hmm.
yet when black bodies when we ask for reparations and compensation, we are told to let it go, just
Yeah,
move on,
we should
ignore
move
it,
on.
right, right.
You get me? And the institutions around us benefiting and were built on it. You're talking about the church system, the
Mm-hmm.
Church of England. You talked about the wealth in museums. Let's talk about the wealth in the churches.
Or
And
the Catholic Church.
they played a significant role. I must say, the Anglican Church, they have been coming out to acknowledge their role in enslavement. 'Cause that's the first thing that both CARICOM Reparations Commission and
Mm-hmm.
even on a local scale, the first thing we say that the number one thing is to have a formal apology. You
Mm-hmm.
need to acknowledge the wrong that was done. Because how can we as a human race say we're not going to repeat chattel slavery again if you haven't acknowledged it and called it by its name?
Mm-hmm. Now
We
you know
keep
in the
skimming
US they're
around
trying
this,
to in the US they're trying to eradicate that it even existed.
that it even existed.
Yeah.
400 years of chattel slavery. Persons will say, "Oh, but there was there was slavery even in Africa. There was slavery in Europe." And yes, you would have these tribal things, but chattel slavery is something completely different. Completely different. And you're talking about decades of it consistently. I mean, we talk about the financial institutions that were built on that. You're looking at the bank there in the Dutch bank, built on
Mm-hmm.
slavery. You're talking about built from the sugar plantations in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
You get me? You're talking about insurance companies
Yep.
as
The
well.
insurance, yes, definitely.
Built on that.
A lot
And
of
then some
shipping companies as well that
just
still
shipping
exist today.
companies, and heck,
Mm-hmm.
some of the best and quote unquote best academic institutions. You can come down to Harvard and the situation happening in Antigua, where we have evidence that Harvard University, Dr. Martin,
Mm-hmm.
Harvard University was built off of the riches of the Royals plantation here in Antigua. There is historical evidence of that. I mean, they removed his name. He had his name somewhere at Harvard University when they're doing the whole renaming thing. But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, Harvard has its role in enslavement as well. They too should find a way to repair. And they have been skidding around the issue. At first, they announced they're sorry, making this committee to study and to research enslavement here in Antigua and how it ties to Harvard. I mean, it's there. You come to Antigua, you can see the Royals estate. All of that sugar money went straight into building Harvard University. And Harvard University just pulled the clip, fired the research team, and we're now back at square one. Now,
Yeah,
when an
it's
institution that's supposed to be so prestigious
mhm.
wants to run from its dark history, its dark and clouded history, you must understand that we do have legs to stand on. We have a right to fight.
We do. We definitely do. But you know, we in changing times, right? Because when you have change in administrations like you have here, because I remember when this Harvard thing started, they were present, right? They were at the table. They seemed like they were moving in the right direction towards some sort of pipeline towards reparation. So it's really disheartening to hear that they just pulled out. You know, you made some really strong mentions about companies and institutions that benefited. I just want to put some major names out there like JP Morgan Chase, who benefited through some of their subsidiaries as well. A few streets away from where the New York Stock Exchange sit, men and women were bought and sold, right? So even in the downtown, in the heart of Manhattan, there's a history of slavery that exists. Same thing with you have you could look back at Stanford, etc., and whole heaps of different companies. Wells Fargo, another big financial institution. What can I say? Like, what's some of the initiatives that the Antigua Repertory Commission, or maybe even the Caribbean one, because you just participated in a regional conference. What would we need outside of an apology? What do you think would be fair reparations? Because sometimes people say, well, maybe it shouldn't just be about money. If it's not about money, and if it's not like a blank check written to all of us, what other forms of reparations would you guys advocate for? Hello?
So sorry about that. You cut in and out. That's one thing that we suffer here in the Caribbean, poor infrastructure, even when it comes to
Oh,
our
I'm
internet.
sorry. I'm sorry. So let me say that again. What type of outside of financial, what other type of forms of reparations do you think is would be good to advocate for at in Antigua? What are you guys advocating for? What are they advocating for on a regional basis?
So as I said, the work that we do here is a part of a much larger organization, which is CARICOM, and we can't look at the thing and look at the
Hmm.
issues as a island to island, because
Okay.
there's power in numbers, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
one thing we know our former enslavers and colonizers were very good at, it is to divide and to conquer. There's a reason
Right.
why when they took our bodies from West Africa, they mixed up the tribes so much that they couldn't communicate with each other to help to
Hmm.
rebel, because everyone
Hmm.
spoke different languages, everyone with different ethnicities. So they were very keen that we have to learn from them, you get me, and not
Hmm.
repeat the mistakes of the past. So we definitely are not looking at it from an Antiguan perspective. But as I said, the first thing for CARICOM, we're looking at a full and formal apology. And I'm just going to go through the 10-point plan. And I want you, as someone who is entering the conversation from a financial perspective, I want your perspective. And I know this is your show, so I probably shouldn't be
That's
asking you
okay.
questions. But I
That's
want from
fine.
your background in academia and of course as a financial expert, when I call out the 10 points that we're looking at,
Uh-huh.
that we're advocating for, you as a Caribbean man, as a West Indian man, which one you would think is most applicable? All right.
Okay, got
So we
it.
said
That's
one.
that. Go ahead.
We, we said one, a full and formal apology. Two,
Yes.
Indigenous peoples development programs. And very quickly, let me explain that. You know, Indigenous people existed before enslavement of Black bodies.
Yes.
You get me? They didn't. The Europeans did not come to empty islands. They came and they
Mm-hmm.
met people here,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm-hmm.
too suffered some complete genocide. So we
Yes,
want to
like in St.
acknowledge
Kitts.
them,
Yeah.
like in
Yeah.
St. Kitts. But we still have even people like the Garafunas. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so we want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they have some benefits here as well. We have number three, funding for repatriation to Africa. you know,
Okay.
you you spoke earlier about the conference I went to in Barbados. And that was basically, the people of Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, and they're looking at the concept of how can Black people really benefit from human rights. Because sometimes human rights will look at the rights of persons of a lighter hue before they look at the rights of people like you and I. And
Mm-hmm,
one of the
mm-hmm,
things that we spoke about was to decolonize airspace or travel from the Caribbean to Africa. Yeah? Because
mm-hmm,
why it is that us, if we want to get back to Africa, we got to go to the US, we got to go to the UK. And guess what? If you don't have a visa, if you don't have an ETA,
mm-hmm. You
you
can't
can't
get
get back to
through.
the motherland. So it wasn't decolonized when you took us on ships from Africa and sailed straight to the Caribbean. It was open seas. And now you have regularized and put in all these things here to block us from getting back there. So we want funding for repatriation to Africa. Number four, the establishment of cultural institutions and the return of cultural heritage, you know, signifying and institutionalizing what is ours. You spoke about the museums that are filled with things that they would
Mm-hmm.
have, robbed and pillaged. Well, we want ours. We
Yeah.
want to institutionalize, and these things are expensive, you
Mm-hmm.
know? I mean, part of the devastation of European colonization was a deliberate attempt to destroy the cultures and languages of indigenous people and
Of
enslaved
course.
Africans. And of
Of
course, to an
course.
extent, indentured workers as well. So
Mm-hmm.
generations later, it has left a significant gap in knowledge for these groups of
Mm-hmm.
people in terms of our histories of our ancestors. And it creates this inability to really deeply appreciate and understand who we are as a people. And, a lot of persons will say enslavement has really given us this complex of not knowing self. Well, of course, you're not going to know self if self was taken away from a personhood. So anyhow, that's
Yes.
number four. We look at number five, assistance in remedying the public health crisis. We are living in a public health crisis from as far north as Jamaica to as far south as Suriname and Guyana. And there is historical evidence, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that has linked the legacy of enslavement and the effect it has on majority of our population here in the Caribbean. For example, the African descended population in the Caribbean has the highest incidence of chronic diseases, of NCDs, non-communicable diseases, from the highest form of hypertension to type 2 diabetes.
Because
And
things were entered
medical,
into our diets that
not
just weren't blended with our genetics. Yeah.
only that, medical evidence has shown that it is a result of nutritional experiences and
Mm-hmm.
physical and emotional brutality and the stress of and trauma of enslavement.
That's
We
still
like
passed
in
down
the
through
Caribbean,
generations. Mm-hmm.
man, I don't know what it is in St. Kitts, yeah? But in Antigua, you have people they like chicken back. Yeah? We
Yeah.
like
Uh-huh.
pigtail. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
In the US, they what they call them cuttings, chitlins. This is
Chitlins. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like
chitlins, yeah?
scraps. Basically, they would describe
We
them as
love that.
scraps.
We love a saltfish, nothing to more salt than a saltfish.
I see how it is. So we were forced because of slavery, we were forced into using certain foods that became ingrained in culture, and then therefore those
Exactly.
foods are not good. I got you. Okay. All right.
Exactly.
You got me on five. What's sixes?
You get me? And we're suffering today. We're still
Mm-hmm.
suffering. You go to any medical institution, majority of the population is on
It's
hypertension or diabetes
hypertension.
pills.
Yeah, you're
That is
absolutely
how we
correct.
eat, but it's a part of our culture. We love the
Mm-hmm.
chicken foot, we love the pigtail, we love the sauce. We cook
Mm-hmm.
with so much
Mm-hmm.
seasoning because they were giving us scraps, so we had to learn how to season the food so it can become palatable.
Yes. Yes.
So we suffer from it even today. So we're looking at advocating with dealing with this health crisis, and it requires a significant injection for science and technology and capital that is beyond our capacity as a region. Yeah? Let's be fair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Education programs, that's number six. And of course, we knew our colonizers left, they never really thought about a structured education system. Yeah? They introduced
Yes.
their religion and their gods, but they try to hide as much knowledge as possible from us. Yeah?
Yes.
Because knowledge is power.
Exactly.
So we want assistance there, and it's only right, especially for people like Harvard, that you build your big, big school on the backs of our ancestors. Number seven, the enhancement of historical and cultural knowledge exchanges, and this looked at tying into institutionalizing heritage programs and at the same time looking at repatriation as well. Then we look at number eight, the psychological rehabilitation as a result of the transmission of trauma. Now, Dr. Martin, trauma can be transitioned from mother to child. You know that?
Yeah, I'm learning. You're
Trauma,
educating me.
trauma is intergenerational. The way how we cope and the way how we respond to things. You know, I was watching a thing there in Haiti, and God bless Haiti, yeah? That's all we can say. But
Mm-hmm.
then I was watching the interviews, and they interviewed a guy, Barbecue. You know, he's one of the leader in gang
Mm-hmm.
officiate over there, yeah, which have taken over the capital. And when they were interviewing him and some young people around him, they were saying, this is how we know to get free. We respond in violence. That's all we ever knew. That is trauma,
Right.
intergenerational trauma. All they ever knew was how to rebel. And that rebellion has not died from since the revolution. So
Because I felt they had no choice.
they had no choice. So we need, as CARICOM member states, we have to attempt to provide rehabilitation support for the massive incidences of the psychological trauma. But scarce resources, again, it's beyond our capacity. Mental health is not something on the high priority list, but
No,
we're
it's not.
suffering from it. How we respond, we have all these gang violence right now with Black kids, and they continue to propagate that. I've never heard, you live in America, you ever hear about white and white crime?
No, but it's the
Yeah,
majority. There are more
right?
white, more white serial killers, more white rapists, more white everything, but yet it's downplayed and it's
Like,
always played up in the black and minority communities because it's
yeah,
ingrained in media. Yeah.
but they made sure that they coined it so the narrative sticks. And here what the
Mm-hmm.
narrative is? Black on black crime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Black on black crime. You see how they're psychologically still imparting some level of enslavement on us. But I move on. Number nine, the right to development through the use of technology. We are always left behind because a lot of it is beyond our capacity.
Yes.
Yeah. And we have to play a significant stake in it. This whole idea of AI, yeah, and facial recognition. If we're not a part of that
We'll be
conversation,
left behind.
we're gonna be left behind, and we're gonna suffer too.
So,
There's a HR program, human resource AI program, whatever it is, and
mhm.
it basically filters applications, but there's a little bit of bias in it. Not a little bit because it'll be biased. AI is not uploaded
Mhm.
intelligence, it's artificial intelligence. It operates
Yes.
based on biases of the developers.
Yes.
That program they filter out based on how the name sounds. So if you name Keisha, down to the bottom of the barrel, as opposed to if
Yep.
you name if you name
It,
Susan.
it was literally written in as code how they do it in real life, right?
Uh-huh,
Because you've seen enough reports of where black names or Hispanic sounding names are put aside, right? And actually, there's this
uh-huh,
interesting study, and I can't remember the author right now, but I came across it. It was a young black sociologist, and she found when it comes to socialization, the black diaspora comes together, they unify, right? So the Caribbean, the
uh-huh,
African American, the African. But when it comes to jobs or anything that needs some sort of economic difference, right, you
uh-huh,
start to separate. And in terms of preference from the US based labor market, it's always Caribbean because we sound more British, right? Then
uh-huh.
African and then African American. So even within US corporate culture, the African Americans are still ranked lower in terms of their own blackness relative to us there in the Caribbean and in Africa. And that's really interesting. What's the last point? What's point 10?
Point 10, debt cancellation and monetary compensation. And this is what majority of the average man, from the time they hear monetary compensation, now you're talking. But the reality is, CARICOM governments that have emerged from slavery and colonization, we have inherited massive crisis of community poverty. We live in
Yes.
one large community poverty across the region. So support for the payment of domestic debt, the cancellation of international debt, and direct monetary payments, where appropriate, are necessary reparatory actions to correct the harm caused by colonization. Because a lot of
I
the debt we inherited was because of the state that they have left us in.
no, I agree with you completely on that. And just I honestly, that's a 10-point plan that I could get behind the majority of them. The
Mm-hmm,
hardest part that I think will be, especially when you talk, I'll say it plainly. I don't trust our leaders if they get a lump sum of money. I'm
mm-hmm,
sorry. And I'm saying that plainly. I do not trust most of our Caribbean leaders or African leaders if they get a lump sum of money. Now we're seeing a shift in culture and behavior, but we can't ignore the outright enrichment of themselves. How many poor people, poor politicians we know that after 10 years they come out rich? And don't get me wrong, it's true here in the United States. All you got to do is
because
talk
I'm
about
just about
Nancy
to say,
Pelosi.
white
Yeah.
leaders
All you got to do
in
is
the
talk
culture.
about Nancy Pelosi. But what I'm talking about too, and I think most people will agree in some regards, and maybe it's a situation where we're so budgetly constrained that when we get money, we need to put money in certain spaces. And maybe this is even part of a bigger conversation, but we don't have a great track record when it comes to fiscal management. And that's my own observation from my economics background. And I don't have to look too far, right? And this ain't political. I don't care which
Right,
government.
right.
I could go island to island and just outright look at fiscal mismanagement. And yes, we could see in Europe and US and the UK, they have all these ills, same thing. They got mismanagement there, but you also see evidence of continued progress. And you're seeing
Mm-hmm,
that in a sense in the region, but we have islands where you still don't have electricity or running water, right? But yet
mm-hmm.
we have billions of dollars that come through our coffers. But that's a bigger conversation,
That's a
Angelica.
bigger topic.
We're gonna come back to that. But I agree with the plan. I really like the idea, and you're already seeing it in Ghana where they're offering free citizenship for black people that come home. I mean, this stems from Marcus Garvey and what he was trying
Mm-hmm,
to do to get us back home. I know in
mm-hmm.
Antigua, you guys had what, Peace Air that was supposed to be doing direct flights from
You're right. From
Antigua
Nigeria
to
to
Nigeria. You know, and but it's so important that you mentioned the need to go through these countries with their visas and their protocols, still creating those barriers.
mm-hmm,
But then we look at sustainability of some things and just how corporations are set up. That means we'll be asking these governments to basically pay for empty seats in planes, right? Because
mm-hmm,
they're gonna have
mm-hmm.
to be some skin in the game, and they're gonna be
Of
people
course.
in our society that even in regular local elections, that they don't want any skin in the game, right?
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
I think mental health, I love that. I love the education push because to me, I agree with Nelson Mandela that education is the key to changing your whole world. I'm a product of that. I'm sure you could also say the same, that you've had a lot of
mm-hmm,
experience because of your education. But I love the plan, and I don't think it's too much. In fact, we are already seeing one of the questions I had for you was what the corporate response has been, and we've seen evidence of big banks like already apologizing, right?
mm-hmm.
Wells Fargo, Bank of America, all these, they apologize for their role in slavery. Now, at the same time, though, right, their financial contribution when it comes time to put their money where their mouth is, it's not there.
It's not there.
What's a $5 million scholarship going to do? When literally, I think it was like about what 30 billion, $40 billion could educate to what could wipe out student debt in
To
the US.
student debt. Mm-hmm,
You understand what I'm saying? So things like
mm-hmm,
that, and even in our region where we now have CBI, citizenship by
mm-hmm,
investment, shouldn't we then say, all right, go out and prioritize some of these things, prioritize mental health, prioritize education. Yet sometimes we're using this money to write off debts from foreign investors perpetuating slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Economic slavery. We're using our passport money and asking our people again. In St. Kitts, we've written off debt for Christoph Harbour, which is a major developer. We've written off debt for other developers. We've taken over failed projects. I'm sure it's the same in Antigua. So yet we're
Mm-hmm.
now asking black bodies to bear the expense and the social strain of selling our passports to aid developers to pay off debt because of their failures for monies that never stayed in the country in the first damn place.
It's a
So that's
vicious
our
cycle.
that's leadership though. That's our
Mm-hmm.
current leaders doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't just blame them for not reparations. Come my fears, they give us the money and then what?
Well, I'll tell you this, and this will be twofold, 2 points
Mm-hmm.
here. When we're
Tell
looking
me.
at corporate society, yeah. So we
Mm-hmm.
have Dennis O'Brien, right? Did you saw? And you know the Irish would have their own unique experience with colonization, right? Through the UK. So Dennis O'Brien has launched something called the Repair Campaign.
Okay.
And the Repair Campaign has set out to help to push what we are pushing, yeah, to lend that level of support, especially when it comes to research. Okay, it makes no sense you're bringing up an argument if you don't have the research and the data to back
Mm-hmm.
it up,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that comes at a cost too, yeah. So the Repair Campaign looks at reparatory justice in a very practical term and what that will look like. So it's good to have a 10-point plan, but what would it
Yes.
look like realistically? So
Yes.
what they have done, and they have consulted with majority of us in the region. I'm not sure if they got to St. Kitts, but they were here the other day, and I know they were in Barbados and Grenada and stuff like that. Is looking at perhaps a multi-stage, multi-development plan coming out of the 10-point plan, right? So if you look at
Okay.
something, for example, um, let's take education, for example, right? Education programs, as opposed to giving XYZ billions of dollars, a one-time thing, we're looking at a 30-year roadmap of what education should be throughout the region and how to
Oh,
get
wow.
there at that
You mean to
particular
tell me
level.
we'll have a plan that's greater than 5 years, which is an
Oh
election
yeah,
cycle? Oh my
it is
God.
it
We
is
might
there.
actually have development.
It's a pretty sound, and it again, it took research. It took
Mm-hmm.
looking at your fiscal situation from island to island. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It took looking at your budgetary plans. Yeah, from island to island. Say, okay, this is where we can begin, and this is where it can lead to. Same thing with the public health crisis. Yeah, where it
Yeah.
stands today, because we're building out renal centers. Yeah, for renal
Okay.
care, but we're not talking about, let us fix it before it gets there.
Right.
Let us
Food
look at the
import,
health
food
before it
import,
gets
food
there.
import. It starts with the food we're putting into our bodies, especially if most of our trading partners is coming out to the US or people that make on
And
behalf of the US.
we are a dumping ground. Okay, go in the supermarket and you're picking up a box
Oh
of
yeah.
cereal that marked on for export only.
Yep, yep, yep. In some cases, that might actually be a good thing, eh? Depending on where it's from. If it's made for the US and it says export only, it's a bad thing. If it's made from the US to go someplace else like Europe and it says export only, it's a good thing because European countries have higher standards, Asian countries higher standards, food tastes differently. When
Mhm.
people come to America after a year, you ain't gonna choice but to gain weight. It ain't even matter if you eat a salad. Right, so I agree with you completely. It's a part of the health crisis as well, because all of this and this whole need at the center of slavery was corporate greed, and corporate greed is still at the center of most of our
Yeah.
social and economic ills today.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. But that repair campaign is phenomenal. I'll try and get some information and share with you after the show, because I think it's something that you might find interesting, especially the plans moving forward. We're looking at culture and music, developing that over a period of time. We're looking at
Okay.
certain diseases that afflicted Black people, for example, sickle cell. You get me? And the level
Yeah.
of research and support that's needed there, but it's not a priority because we're already in a crisis. You know, in Antigua, you have almost 19,000 people who are on either or both blood pressure medication and diabetes medication.
No, 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 I understand. We only have to look at our pictures. I mean, I myself have struggled with my own personal health and only now focused and trying to pay attention to nutrition labels and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. When you look at, when you think something should have like coconut water should be coconut water, one ingredient, but yet it has 20 when the chicken
Mm-hmm.
you buy in the store in Costco for $5, and you can't blame people for a whole chicken for five when in a restaurant it's 30. So now you could feed your families because you have limited budgets, but you're killing yourself in the process because of all the
Possibly.
chemicals embedded. Let me ask you this, Angelica. What has, because education, we know that the governments are responding. What has UE's role been in the fight for financial reparations, or maybe they could do it from, I'm thinking they advocating, hey, let's put scholarships on all UE campuses, right? Get Germany, Europe, whatever, put $1 billion and all our regional people go to school for free. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I envision as a proposal out of an institution like US, and like for you said, dollars for research as well. What do you know of any response
But
coming out of the UE?
what UE is doing significantly, and the CRC, the Center for Research, a CARICOM Center of Research and Reparation, is based at UE. Yeah.
Okay.
So UE's role right now is documenting and researching because no one can tell our history but ourselves.
Yes.
You get me? And acquiring that level of education and having academia just, you know, focusing solely on that is very important where it is because it also is providing the legal backing that's going to be needed. So we have
Yes.
the research happening, the Center for Research on Reparations, and they're working in tangent with the legal minds as well. Because if we're going to say we're going to the International Criminal Court and you have your lawyers there, they have to be equipped with the information. And that level of research and you're talking about breaking down and dissecting 400 years of systematic slavery across what 14 islands countries. It takes a
Mm-hmm.
lot, but you Israel
Um,
is also very much open and they
but
link with other institutions and academic institutions and fostering that level of education as well, having our
that's the
people. Mm-hmm,
that's my fear though, right, Angelica, is that I'm happy we have a center. I'm happy we have an institute, but is it funded? Because what this type of research is going to be extremely qualitative, and qualitative
mm-hmm,
means you have to be on site. You're going to have to
mm-hmm.
visit archives. You're going to have to visit descendants. You're going to have to travel. So is and then who should fund it? If we're begging for reparations from the external players, I think initially, then as Caribbean regional governments, then I think we should have a unified decision to fund it, just like how we've decided to fund institutions like the CCJ, the CDB, etc. Initially
Mm-hmm.
fund such an institution. I'm hoping that's part of the plan, so they could go out and do the work. Because sometimes you need proof of concept in order to show to some of these corporations and some of these agencies that, hey, this is the work we could do. Imagine what we could do if we were properly funded.
Exactly. And I don't want to speak too much on it because I'm not sure where the funding comes from. If they're
Hmm.
funded, I know the work is there. I know they're pushing out publications. I know they're curating and collecting information. You have great historians like Sir Hilary Beckles, who is, chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. He does the work with the CRC as well. And then you have persons like Professor Vereen Shepherd, who has written almost all of our major history books has been produced
Okay.
by her and is putting in the work, especially even when it comes to human rights as well. So the work is happening, the work is being done. Um, but this is a long game.
Yeah.
This is a marathon. This is a movement. It's a long game, but the work is being done. I want to believe it's being supported in some shape or form from Caribbean governments. I stand corrected if that's not the case, but I can only speak on the work that they have been doing. I definitely can't speak on how they're funding or how they go about in um in getting the work done. But the work is being done.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's comforting. It's very comforting in knowing that the work could be done is doing done. It's 2 o'clock now. We've been given the
Mhm,
great green light to go a little bit longer. So I'll ask you a couple more questions, Angelica, and I'll let you go on with your day. I truly appreciate your time. I'm getting some messages here, and people were like, "Hey, the conversation is fire." Some they're interested in the points that being made. So they like you. They like you, and they like the difference that you're bringing to this conversation. I've never done a topic like this, by the way, so this is new, but it was really important given that this is the 1 month a year that they try to highlight Black history, at least in the US, and we have some listeners from the diaspora. Um,
mhm.
how can the public get involved in the reparations movement?
You know, that's something that even from my own commission, we're working on getting that conversation happening every single sphere of society. There was a period of time when the conversation surrounding reparations was left up to the intellects.
Hmm.
If it wasn't left up to the intellects, it was the Rastafarian community who were pushing, especially for the repatriation part of it. That conversation cannot happen in a vacuum anymore. It has to happen at a real level, at a school level, at a church level. These are the conversations to have Sunday morning when you're delivering your sermon. This is a
Hmm.
conversation to happen in every cabaret or bar. This is a conversation to happen in our music, in calypso, in soca. This is having this real conversation every single day, and it has to be a topic that we should not stray away from having. So I think for the commissions across the region, they're really focusing on education and bringing that conversation to light. And it should not happen only just when it's Black History Month or when it's Black Heritage Month. You know, it shouldn't just happen when it's African Liberation Day on May 25th. It shouldn't just
Hmm.
happen on Bob Marley birthday. It shouldn't just happen on these significant events. It's
Hmm.
an everyday conversation. We talk about sex every day. We talk, we
Right.
talk about money every day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
reparations isn't sexy though. That's why they would say, right? Because it
But we
seems so
should be
far
angry.
out of reach though. It seems so far out of reach.
And I've heard that argument and I accept that argument. But is it really far out of reach? Last year, I put it to some young people, some young intellects, and I'm like, slavery, the end of slavery, at least in Antigua and Barbuda, would have happened some 191 years ago. Yeah?
Hmm.
That means you are 4 generations out of
Right.
being enslaved. You're 4 generations removed from being enslaved. Your great great grandmother would probably be on a plantation, just on
Hmm.
the cusp of it. You're 4 generations away from being born and somebody else giving you a name that you weren't born. And that is why we change even the narrative. We were never slaved, we were enslaved. Because a noun can be an adjective. We
Hmm.
were, and that could have been you. So is it really far removed? Is a conversation of repair far removed? Is a conversation on justice? That's exactly what it is. It's just justice.
So
Why
then,
why is justice removed from us?
do we have a responsibility then, Angelica, to because I went through my school system in St. Kitts. I didn't hear these topics. I
Mhm.
barely heard about important people in our society. So don't we have this responsibility in our education
Oh
to treat it?
yes.
Because I've spent some time in China. I had the ability to teach in China. I stayed a few months in China. And one of the things is that the Chinese curate their education very carefully based on their government's future plans. So
Oh
they
yeah,
want you to
definitely.
know. So everybody's gonna learn English. This whole Spanish and French that we do in the Caribbean, in the Eastern Caribbean, nobody's doing that there. Nobody talk French like that. So what? They would mandate it be Spanish. They mandated it be English because English is the language of commerce. So everybody
Mhm.
in China speaks English. But yet in our
Mhm.
region, we still like we're struggling to who are we appeasing? We're talking about French when we should be talking now about Mandarin and talking about whatever it is the Indian language is called because that's where we're moving to. You understand what I'm saying? That's where the wealth is being created. So how much of it for our young people to care starts with what we teach them in the
Because
elementary
we
system,
have to decolonize the
even
education
our education.
system.
So there you go, it's all over. So even though we've been free, technically, some of our governments for 200 years, some like our smaller ones for 40 plus, we still have all the colonial history embedded in our system still.
We have to decolonize our education system because it's still European based. Yeah, the metrics we use are still European based. We have to decolonize our justice system because they left us with a broken system. We still run up to England and talk about Privy Council looking at white men with white wigs to give us justice. Can you imagine that? Can you
Right.
imagine that? You see,
Right.
we have to decolonize our economies. Our
Mm-hmm.
economies is still very much colonized because it's tied to what a colonizer can give to us.
Can I say this about tourism real quickly, Angelica?
Oh
Which
Lord,
are
Jack,
our
remember I
which
work in there now.
no, I know, but no, just high level. But which markets do we go to for tourism, which is and tourism is usually our lifeblood in terms of revenue. Which markets do we go to? The
The
same
US, UK, and Canada.
the same people that we and Europe, right? Same
Mm-hmm,
people that we're looking for reparations from. The
mm-hmm.
same
We depend
people
on their
that
money.
benefit on that grew their mecca of cities
Mm-hmm,
on our backs. And
mm-hmm,
yet we're looking for them now to, hey, give us some trickle. Right?
mm-hmm,
But they while Mexico and all the sub-region is calling themselves Caribbean, increasing competition, right? So
mm-hmm.
there isn't even that pipeline. And but yet we fail to realize that there are two halves of this world, right? Or maybe four quarters is a better way to look at it: the Western and Eastern Hemisphere, and the Northern and Southern, right? So why is it we're not looking towards Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Venezuela for people? You know what? I've been to DR and even in Puerto Rico. You know where they go to for their tourism? They go south.
Mm-hmm.
They ain't going north. They're not
Mm-hmm.
going into to Europe and begging Europeans to come. They're going down to the wealthy Argentinians. Why is it Avianca Airline is not flying into our region? That makes no sense,
It's
right?
ignorant.
Because so like we even in our main revenue sources, we then go directly back to them and with our hands out and say, hey, come give us your investment dollars, give us the people to put in the beds after we use your investment dollars. Like it's just a cycle.
I
It's
told
sad.
you when you think
How
about it,
do we unravel it?
our economy is based on servitude.
Hmm. Because by
And
design, though, right? You know that it's
by
by
design,
design. Yeah.
by design,
Because when we go
by
to the
design.
IMF and we take these massive loans, they're gonna
Mm-hmm,
put people in and tell us this is how to do, and they're gonna give
mm-hmm,
us agriculture and find something for us to export that we can't use. Imagine saying it's used to produce sugar, and we never used to use the sugar we produce.
mm-hmm,
It was all exported, so we had to import sugar.
mm-hmm. By
And
design.
and then after moving towards debt reduction, we find some of our Caribbean governments going right back into the bosom of the IMF. Now
The IMF, the World
with
Bank.
Donald,
it-
exactly.
Man,
Now with Donald Trump at the helm, and he's going
man,
to do these things. So it's going to be a big stick policy all over again, Angelica.
that's exactly, history repeats itself. And that goes back to number one of the 10-point plan. They need to
Right.
acknowledge what had happened before it happens again.
But we've had some
Chattel,
apologies.
chattel slavery can happen again because all of this injustice is happening, and nobody's calling a spade a spade.
It's happening right now. Exactly. Just in different forms, right? Climate
Yep,
change. We've seen it
yep,
in agricultural where the US government would penalize us for subsidizing farmers, but yet they subsidize their farmers all the damn time. You know,
mm-hmm,
it's the big stick because and you made a really important point earlier. We need to have one voice. As much as you're telling me, let's look at it from the CARICOM Reparations Commission, from that regional perspective, we still make our decisions on an individual level.
oh
So
yes,
we still undermine the efforts of regional institutions like
mm-hmm,
this. Our
mm-hmm,
individual governments do that.
yeah, because
So
it's
it's
a
a
race to
path.
the end.
It is. It is. And we not seeing that we can race together. We can lock our arms and we could go down and push together. We see ourselves as competitors, as if
Mm-hmm.
only one of us will get reparations. So if it's only one of us, it must be me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's
Look,
it's 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 a
final.
conversation to definitely explore at a deeper level as well, because it comes back down to not understanding self and the complexities that we have, because we don't know
It's
self.
it's going to take a lot. Like our leaders need to appoint commissions. These commissions should be paid. Like you mentioned, you work in tourism. You should only be working in reparations with a full salary, and have
Mm-hmm.
a whole team of researchers. This is all we do every day. This need millions of dollars earmarked from each Caribbean government's budget. That's what we need.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, definitely, and it's something
Last.
to work towards. But in outside of that, the work still continues. We go into the schools, we
Mhm,
participate, we have competitions, we're talking to young leaders and having that as a line item for national debates. Can't go
mhm.
silently, because it's not just reparations. When people ask me, why you get involved in reparations, I'm like, reparations is not for me. I'm thinking about the generation that's coming up.
Exactly, because we won't
I
get
don't
it.
expect to see it in my lifetime, but I expect my children to understand that conversation, that fight, and to continue with it, and their children.
I couldn't agree more. So I was gonna ask you about the future reparations, but you just answered it. But I'll give you this as an example. Alexander Hamilton was from Saint Kitts and Nevis. He's seen
Mm-hmm.
as one of the founding fathers of the United States, but yet we still need visas to come to America. We gave you your
Imagine that.
first Secretary of the Treasury. We have given more and contributed more in terms of the foundational underpinnings of the US government, but yet petitions and divisions this day needs to have it. Yet every year they go up. We have our premier in Nevis come up to New York and he do a ceremony about acknowledging Hamilton. Yet we get nothing. We derive no
From it.
benefit from being involved, which makes absolutely no sense. Look, Angelica, I want to thank you so much. So, as we wrap up today's discussion on reparations and financial justice, one thing is clear: this isn't just a conversation about the past, it's about the future of the Caribbean. The economic inequalities we face today are not accidental, they are a direct result of centuries of exploitation. As we don't actively push for change, the gap will only widen. So the work of people like Ms. Angelica Donahue and her reparations commission in Antigua and the one in St. Kitts and the many throughout the entire region, their fight for reparations is more than just financial compensation. It's about acknowledgement, it's about accountability, it's about actions. And whether through direct payments, debt relief, investments in education, or structural reforms, the goal remains the damn same. We need to build a stronger and more financially independent Caribbean. And it starts with the leaders y'all vote for, Jesus Christ. The Caribbean Reparations Commission has laid the groundwork, and institutions like the UE continue to advocate. People like Ms. O'Donoghue travel the region and echoes this voice. We need more of this. As Caribbean people, we must educate ourselves, stay engaged. Because I got educated today. We must educate ourselves, stay engaged, and demand action from both our governments and those responsible for these historical injustices. The future of our region depends not just on what was taken from us, but on what we fight to reclaim. So I want to thank you, Angelica, for your insights and our listeners for being a part of this critical conversation. Let's keep the dialogue going. Send us messages, comments, questions that you may have, and tell us, what does financial justice look like to you? Join me next week on Money Matters, where we'll tackle another issue shaping our financial future in St. Kitts and Nevis and the wider Caribbean. Until then, stay informed, stay empowered, and remember, it takes financial knowledge to know that you're making financial mistakes. This has been Money Matters. I'm Dr. Terrance Martin. See you next week. Jamster, back over to you.